Today I'm sewing on the Brother Quattro, which is an amazing sewing machine loaded with lots and lots of great features for quilters. One of the things that I like about it a lot is that I'm going to set it for the scant 1/4 inch seam allowance, and ahead of time I tested my seam allowance to see where I wanted it. What I have done is first selected the utility stitch, and then I have moved the needle to the right a few points till I get to the 1.5, and then I touch the mirror image so that I move the needle position to the right. And that, to find out where your scant 1/4 inch is, those instructions will be in the book that comes with the templates when you purchase that kit. Also, I'm so fortunate because I get to use one of Tracy's tables, which is a great set of furniture because it moves on wheels, and I have lift up ends, and I can enlarge it or make it smaller whenever it's needed. To my left, I'm working from a design wall, and that makes it easier for me to work with my patchwork as I'm sewing. I find it so much better to work with my work standing upright, then I won't lose my way as I'm sewing. We're going to start out by first working on the center 8-pointed star. It is done very similar to the units out here, so I'll first start out by sewing 2 units together, because I would do that 4 different times. I would start out by sewing 2 of these together. So we'll put those right sides together. The only difference in the center would be that I've alternated with the orange and then one of my fussy cut pieces. On the outside edge, sometimes I have 2 of these alike, or I would do pairs of these down in here, depending on where we are in the block. First seam I'm going to sew when I'm putting this block together is the seam right here connecting these 2 diamonds, and I want to stop a 1/4 inch from this edge. I'll match them right sides together, making a perfect match. And then I'm going to use a new tool that I just love to use. In fact, I would have a hard time doing it without it. It is the Quilter's Quarter Marker. And this tool has all the different angles that a quilter likes to use when you're quilting. Notice that it has a dashed line around the outside edge, and there's little holes at each of the corner of the ruler. It has a 45, a 135, a 120, a 90, and a 60. What I'm going to do is place that ruler up on top of my patchwork, and I'll line it up with the corner. That will give me the perfect spot to drop my pencil in and mark my stopping point. I don't want to sew past that, but now I can sew with confidence and know that I'll have that perfect opening. Now we're ready to sew those pieces together. What I'm using is a stiletto. It has a cover on it, so if it's laying around it won't hurt somebody, but it's a sharp little tool, and it controls my fabric at the point of sewing. I lay it in the palm of my hand like this, or let it lay in the arc, and it just rests there, and I have a real nice tool to guide my fabric with. With the stiletto resting in the arch of your hand, use it as if you're holding a pencil, See how I guided the fabric right up to the point of sewing? Control it so that you have nice straight seams. Sometimes if I used to sew without a stiletto, I would have uneven seams. Okay, now when I get to this dot that I made with the Sew Unique ruler, I want to stop just before that dot or right on it. Just don't go past it. And then when I get there, you can either reverse or touch the reverse button and hold it down, and it'll fix that stitch, and then we'll cut the thread. Then what you do is you press that seam open first with your fingers, and then I'll show you what it looks like. That's a very nice beginning, or stitch, I should say. That's a very nice match as far as those pieces go. We'll move it over to the ironing board so you can see it a little better. See how I have that 1/4 inch left open there at the end. We'll press it with the iron, and I like to use a little bit of steam. And now we'll put it back up on the design wall so that you can see where we are. Now the next thing I'm going to do is show you how to do this center seam of the star. Ahead of time, I have sewn most of the star together because I would just repeat that last step that I did. I would sew each of these in pairs of 2, always leaving that 1/4 inch open. So it's the same technique, marking each of those pieces. Now I have the 2 halves, and notice how the orange and the fussy cut pieces are alternating. What I want to do is match this point right here to this one right there. So what we will do is pin it so that I have the pin right on that point, and I'll move it so that you can get a good look at what I'm doing. Insert the pin there and there. Leave that pin standing, and then put a pin in the middle, or to hold that, and then we'll sew across the middle. We have to mark both of these corners, this end and this end, with that quilter's quarter marker by Sew Unique. So here's what we'll do. We'll lay it up here, and we'll put a mark right here. That's our beginning point, and this is our ending point. So we'll pin here to hold it. Okay, now this time I'm going to roll my needle down so I can hit that dot right on. Okay, drop your presser foot, and after I know I have it right on the dot, I will touch that reverse button and keep it down until I have fixed the stitch, and then we will start sewing forward. Always controlling the fabric with the stiletto as I sew. Now I want to sew to this point right here. This is how you would sew all of your 8-pointed stars if that would be the pattern that you were working on. A perfect match in the center of the block. Now the only thing that I would have left to do would be to press that seam open, and always finger press on a hard surface. You get a much better job when you do it that way. And another little detail that I would do would be to clean up or remove those ears on the center of the block. Probably a good idea to do that before you press it. So after you have the center that you want to remove those ears. that would be how we would make the center of the Dutch rose pattern. Next, I want to move this out so you can see how each of these look. See how we have almost a cross in the center of the board. I'm going to show you now how to add this square into here on all three sides. So I'll take it down and we'll put that square into the pattern. Actually, I'll probably attach it to this unit first because the process is the same. So we'll take it down here and I'm going to put the square right sides together. And notice that I have left a little bit of an ear on this end of the block. And that's, you need to have it that way. That is your 1/4 inch seam allowance. Scooch it up. And I'm going to put this back. But you know what? There's one thing that I could make it a little bit easier for you. And that would be if I marked that spot and show you exactly where I want to stop. Now remember that this tool has the 1/4 inch or for the 90-degree angle as well. So I'm going to lay this down on there and we'll drop a pencil mark in there. And so we know, actually I'll do it on the opposite side because I will need it eventually. Okay, now it's ready. So we'll put it on top. I'm going to flip this diamond backwards and I'm going to match up. Remember where I stopped a 1/4 inch from the edge? I'm going to match that intersection to the dot that I put on the square. So we'll move it over. So that seam line will match up to that dot. And I'll put a pin in there. And now I have the ear on the other end that I want. So we'll sew that seam first. Okay, we'll come right off that corner. And sewing way to the end is the way I like to do it. And then onto an anchor cloth. Now we'll press that seam open with our finger first on both the right and the wrong side. Now we'll take a look at the next part, and this is an important part. See how I have that square on? Now we'll put this right sides together, and I now need to sew this seam from here to there. It's a very easy thing to do, especially if you have a couple of tips like this to put it together. It's really not all that advanced. I would say this is probably an intermediate project. But sometimes beginners like to stretch and do something a little bit more difficult. And you don't always want to sew just squares together your whole life. And this is really a fun project to do. So and besides that, all of the instructions will be in the book that you get with the, or that comes with the template set. Okay, that is that first corner. Look at how nice and strong that is. No holes in the corner because we have crossed over that intersection from both directions. Press that seam open, lay it down nice and flat, and press it with the iron. The next one that I want to now do is to connect it to the actual main part of the block. So I want to make this seam in here first. So right sides together. We'll do the orange side first. And remember, I've already marked that little dot on the square below. So I'm going to match up where I stopped sewing 1/4 inch from the edge to the dot in the corner of the square. You probably can see that little dot right there. So match that up like that, and then I'll put a pin in there. And when I sew this seam, I'll come across from this end right across there. We'll make sure this is folded open, or pressed open I should say, and we'll pin this like this, and then I'll give you a look at what it's going to look like before I sew the seam. When I sew this, I want to come on the fabric right in the crevice right here, sew this seam, go across that intersection so that I have a strong corner on this block. Just taking a little time to adjust everything is worthwhile because you want to have all those edges matched up real good. Okay, we'll pull this pin out and we'll make sure this is flipped out of the way, and we'll come right across. And here we have the intersection 1/4 inch from the edge. Looks very, very good. We're ready to go on and do the next part. So what I'm going to do now is flip this over, and we're going to do this last seam and do like this. And just like all the other Y seams, we'll match it up like this. And I'm going to sew from this side so that I can see that intersection. So we'll pin it first here, and here I'm going to sew right across, right in there. After you've done a couple of these, it just becomes much, much easier to do. You'll notice that I have a little tiny pin cushion that never leaves my side. It has a little stick on the bottom so it doesn't fall off of my workstation. Okay, here we are. That is the square inserted between the two sets of diamonds. Isn't that nice? Great way to put that in without any effort at all. Just make sure you make that little dot on your square before you get started. Of course, you would take time to press it really well before you would sew it into the rest of your quilt. Now let's get ready to do that corner unit because we want to match what we've done on the other three corners. Remember, we had something that looked like this on the corner, so we want to make sure that we have the next one exactly like that. So let's take a look at the other one so we can do them all the same. We know that we have to have this one sitting off the point, but we have to have the squares going in that pattern. So I'll put this one on like this, and this one's going to come over here. So the first one I'll put on will be this one. Now this time I will match this corner right here, and we can sew that one on just like it sits right like that. This time we'll go right off the corner. And you know what? I see I haven't trimmed off those ears, so I'll probably do that now. And that seam will be pressed open. Wrong side first, and then the right side. Now lay these two pieces up there again. Remember, we wanted that little path of squares to come off the point like that. So I'll now just sew these two together like this. And we have a match there. Squares and triangles and anything that has the same or equal sides, those are really easy to do. Press that seam open. Okay, the last thing we need to do on this corner is to match this intersection going right across here. So what I'm going to do is put these two right sides together. What I do is I insert the pin through the top right on the seam line, through about 1/4 of an inch from the edge, and through the bottom 1/4 of an inch from the edge. And let that pin stand, and then another one alongside of it, and that should give us a perfect match. Now we're ready to sew this seam right in here. When you get to a pin, go really slow. And by the way, these are silk pins, so the shaft is really tiny. So really, what you want to do is use silk pins, because if you have pins that are too big, you'll lose some of the accuracy. So that's another tip that I like to pass on to you, is that do use good pins when you're sewing your patchwork together. That is the intersection that we always like to see when we've got our points matching from every direction. This point intersects with these going in both directions. You will press all of those with the iron, first finger pressing and then with the iron afterwards, so that they lay really nice and flat. Let's go back to the design wall and take a look at what we have up here. I want to make another unit that looks just like this. We need to add a square in here, and we need to add 2 half square triangles in here. Remember, this was the straight of grain on the pieces when we cut them earlier in the show. The first thing that you would do would be to put this one right side together, and we would sew this one on going up into here, and using that same technique for doing the Y seam that I've been using with the square earlier, where you'll sew, stop at the dot, and then readjust and go to the other end. So that would be the same way as you would insert the square up in here. So you add the square and the 2 half square triangles, and this is what you would have. Your intersection here is 1/4 of an inch from the outside edge, and when you turn it to the back side, this is what it will look like when you're done. Everything pressed open, and it lays really nice and flat. After we have the unit completely sewn together, we do the pressing and turn it to the back side, and you can see how everything lays really nice. Everything is flat, pressed using the steam iron. Everything looks very nice. Now let's move one of those units over to the ironing board. When you look closely at this, you're going to see that I want to sew this seam, this one, and this one. This one here has the 1/4 inch seam left open. So we're going to put this right sides together, but you know what I want to do before I do that is I want to put a mark right in here so that I have the 1/4 inch seam allowance to follow. So we'll use the Quilter's Quarter marker by So Unique, and we'll put a little mark right there so we can see where we're going to go. You see that little dot right there? Okay, now I'm going to match that dot to where I stopped sewing right in here. So we'll put those right sides together, and we'll go over here to the sewing machine, and we'll fold this back and it's really just like all of the other Y seams that we've been doing. It's just that I'm now working with a larger piece, so it's a little more fabric to hold on to. So we'll put a pin right there. Okay, now when I look up in here, see how I have stopped 1/4 of an inch from the edge there? So we'll do like this, and we'll fold this back, and we'll put a pin in here. So it's going to be really easy. I'm going to sew directly across this intersection, all the way across. And here I have another point where I can look at. See how this is 1/4 of an inch from the edge. So I will look at that point when I come across that area. That intersection matches up, and I'm going to put a pin in that one right on that point, and I'll match it to the seam line on the bottom, 1/4 of an inch from the edge. So we'll put that pin in right there, and then we'll hold that in place with a pin. Now we're ready to sew, and now I want to sew right along the edge of that fold. So I'll pull that pin out, hold this down with the stiletto, okay, as we approach this intersection, we'll go slow. Actually, I'll pull that pin out before I get there, and then I'll hold it with the stiletto because I know I have it where I want it to be. So I'll just hold it down in front of the presser foot. And work our way across that seam. This is the fun part when you start getting it into the bigger pieces. Okay, here we go. To the end. See that nice intersection right there? Everything is matched up from this direction and that direction because I took the time to pin it as it was needed. Now I'm going to sew this seam for the last seam. So I'll now flip these like this and readjust the fabric. And this time I will sew from here across through there, and that will connect this unit into this part of the block. And we almost have one of these completely attached to the block. There it is. Nice, nice inset corner. Not that hard to put in that Y seam. So now we have this seam and this seam just completed. Now the next one that would be done would be just like that. We would do this one and then that one. So we'll flip it over, adjust our fabric, and this time I'm going to work at it from the other side because I want to see where this intersection is. So we'll insert this pin right here, right on that intersection where the two intersect, and on this seam allowance right here, 1/4 of an inch from the edge. See where that pin comes out on the bottom? So there's actually a Y right there from the point. So you have two seams that intersect on that side. Leave that pin standing until you've got the other one inserted in front of it, and then pull that one out. So now the seam that I'm going to sew is from here down to this part right down in here. I'll pin this so it's held in place. So we'll do like that. So now you can easily see how easy that is. It's one nice straight seam and no pivoting at all, just straight across. Notice how I like to lift the presser foot at this point so I get right close to that folded edge of the previous seam. Okay, there we are. Actually, it's quite easy to do. I'm not so sure. I might change this to a different skill level. It's not advanced, I know that. It's very easy to do. As long as you take the time and go slow enough to where you can match or get those pins inserted right on the intersections, right across that point. And it's so nice when you can have the design wall next to you and have enough cabinet to set it on. It really is a nice nice situation when you have all the right things at your hands. Now we have just one last seam, and then we have inserted that part of the block. So I would have this seam, and then that whole section of the block would be done. Then what's left to do is to repeat that last step and add more of these to fill out the outside part of the block. I think you'll have to agree that it's been a lot of fun learning how to put the Dutch rose or the Carpenter's wheel, whatever you want to name it, together. Thank you so much for watching today, and I hope I've inspired you to create your own Dutch rose. Join us again on Inspired by Shar.